Who's Dr. Stinky McDougal?
You mean the legend?
He's a real buckaroo bonsai kind of guy.
I watched him dice a guy into pieces with 6 f***ing words.
Stinky's the most inconvenient man in most rooms.
He's a master of drunk boxing.
Every time Stinky calls, my blood pressure skyrockets!
I heard he's staging an evolution.
Dr. Stinky McDougal says the difference between a revolution and an evolution is the conscious choice not to break everything in the transition.
And now, broadcasting from the borderless territory of Liberty Valley, Minnesota, here's your host, Dr. Stinky McDougal! Shake it, baby!
Hey, welcome everybody to the Stinky McDougal podcast, episode 2. Today's guest is Dr. Rollin McCraty, who is the Director of Research at the HeartMath Institute and Research Center. Dr. McCraty is a psychophysiologist whose research interests include the physiology of emotions, heart-brain communications, and the global interconnectivity between people and the Earth's energetic systems. And the connection to the Earth's energetic systems is one of the things I find most interesting because it answers, or at least it begins to look at the question, are heart attacks connected to solar flares, for example? Today, we're going to discuss the research going on at the HeartMath Institute and dig in a little deeper into their brand new network of random numerical generators called RNGs in the Global Consciousness Project 2.0, of which one of them is sitting on my shelf right here next to me. Welcome to the show, Rollin.
Well, thanks, Bob.
It's good to see you. Now, you're coming to us from California today, right?
That's correct.
All right. So now, how long have you been involved with the GCP project? And maybe you could take a minute to also explain to people, because I've tried 100 times, what is the GCP and what do we think we have in our hands?
Which one do you want me to do first?
Well, how about welcome yourself. Where are you calling from? And how long have you been with the program?
Yeah, I'm one of the original people that helped Doc Childrey, who's the founder of HeartMath, found the organization. So I've been involved as director of research here since 1991, I guess, 30 some years.
Oh, wow.
I've known, Roger Nelson, start there, who's the Dr. Nelson, founded the original Global Consciousness Project, as we now kind of lovingly call it GCP-1, over 25 years ago. And I met Roger many times. We were both on the same speaking circuits and things like that around the world. And so I've known Roger and became good friends with him and his wife, actually, for a very long time. And our lab, was one of the hosts for one of the GCP-1 devices. Still is. There's still one back here in one of the labs. It was you had to really be into it to participate in GCP-1. You had to dedicate a computer to it, and you had to go get your own RNG, and you almost had to be a coding expert to get it all hooked up and working. And
really? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a trivial thing. It's one of the things we solved in GCP-2.
And there were 65 when you guys hit your peak. Is that how many there were?
Probably, yeah, somewhere around that. I think there, over the years, there's been probably over 150 devices that come and went off the network. And I think the maximum number of devices at any one time was 60 some, if I remember. I don't remember exactly. Roger would know, but.
Mm-hmm. And how many are running today?
On GCP-1, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not really sure. Probably 15, something like that. It's
okay.
Roger retired, and he asked us to take it over. But you kind of know some of the story here. We're probably going back to 3 years ago, and he really has retired now for the second time, and sold his home in Princeton and so on. So he's just not really trying to keep up and prod people to keep their devices hooked up and running.
Well, and there's only so many years, and his experiment is going to continue to produce the data.
And GCP-2 is launched now too, so we already have in just the first month, 4 times the number Roger ever had. So so now there are 1,000 random numerical generators that are going out with the GCP project 2.0. How many of those 1,000 are out? Are all 1,000 out, or some? No. We just really launched the devices to the public to be able to get involved with citizen scientists and to host one about a month ago. Mm-hmm. And so there's, I think, on the network, hooked up, working, sending data, around probably 130 of them now.
Very good. Now, are you still taking applications for people who might be interested?
Yeah. We can get into
very
that.
Good. Yeah.
But there's another 100 and some that are in transit.
Sure. Yeah, it takes time to build these things. Absolutely. I was very happy I got mine very quick.
Yeah, I mean, we've got them. We kind of keep building them as the orders, but I mean, once we get there's an approval process. We can talk a bit more about that. And once we, all that gets done, it takes time for them to get from here to there and people to get them hooked up and all that too. So there's about 100 in that. 107 in that.
Since we're talking about them, why don't you explain for a moment what these random numerical generators are?
Random number generators. I think the best way to think of a random number generator is as an electronic coin flipper, right? So we know, most people, I think, certainly know, if you take a coin, it doesn't matter. You flip it 100 times or 1,000 times or however many times. On average, you're going to get 50 heads and 50 tails, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, and I'll come back to this point in a minute, but it's an important thing to understand how this network works. Is you while you're flipping the coins, you might get a whole string of heads in a row, right? Or repeating sequences.
The probability exists, right?
Yeah. Well, if you actually try it, it really does happen.
Yes.
A random number generator is basically doing that, only really fast. And instead of heads and tails, you get ones and zeros. And it turns out it's actually really hard to make a true random number generator. It's real hard. And the key is that the past behavior cannot predict the future behavior. Right. And this is why they're really a lot of science goes into them, because these are the key devices used in cryptography, for example. And a lot of applications in science now for true random number generators. And so the device you have there on your shelf is specifically designed to plug into and work with the Global Coherence Project 2.0. And each one of those devices actually has 4 independent RNGs, or random number generator circuits, on it. So every one of those is actually 4 random number generators. So when if we got 100 of them out there, we really have 400.
Right, versus the original 15 and the original 65. So that's a huge, huge number. What's the multiple of GCP generators you'll have versus the original network?
Well, our goal is 1,000, and like I said, Roger had 60, so it's a couple of orders of magnitude bigger.
Right. Yeah, I think I saw something like 50 times the power. And now you had talked about this previously. You and I just chatted. You talked about how having more of these generators increases the sensitivity of the system.
Well, correct. That's one of the things we, in looking very deep into the GCP1 data, 25 years of data and many, many events had been analyzed. We were able, or one of my guys on my staff is a lot smarter than me, mathematically speaking. He's got a degree from Stanford in quantum computations. Was able to uncover that the number of devices in the network is related to the sensitivity to detect the changes in what I'm calling or thinking of as a global consciousness field, and the field of global consciousness around the planet. It might be good, Bob, if we actually start with some basics, because I'm not sure.
That's good. Where would you like to start? I think, obviously the question of consciousness is one that everybody likes to discuss.
Well, I mean, so we kind of covered what an RNG is, and the I'm going to be a little nonlinear here and try and connect the dots for you. Well, first of all, when we look at the GCP1 data, the statistics on it now, after this is all Roger Nelson's work, after 500 what he called formal events. Now, there's many other events have been analyzed, but a formal event means that it was pre-registered. In other words, we're going to look at Earth Day or Global Peace Day or these types of known future events. We're going to analyze it. We're going to analyze it starting at this time. These are the statistics we're going to use, and all that laid out ahead of time, right? So that had to happen to be qualified as a formal event.
Right.
So there's 500 formal events that were analyzed, and the statistics, the accumulated statistics on that, are a little over 3 trillion to 1 odds against chance that this is a fluke finding. I mean, it's 3 trillion.
So during the events, the GCP stopped flipping, either a 1 or a 0.
I'm going to go there next, because it's actually So actually, I had this wrong for a long time.
Oh, really?
You know,
Oh, yes, please.
I was actually talking, out there, talking, yeah, we're part of the Global Consciousness Project. It's really cool because blah, blah, blah. And so the mistaken perspective I had was that when an event, now let me go back before I go here, though, just to connect the rest of that dots. When I say these 500 events, these are events that usually involve a lot of media coverage that evoke people to be paying attention to something and feeling an emotion. Now, emotionality is really clear, but that's the strong ingredient in what causes what I'm about to explain to happen. So the largest single effect on the network was actually 9/11, which we just had the anniversary for yesterday, right?
Right.
It was a huge effect on this global network. But many, like I said, many hundreds of events have been looked at now. But it's events that trigger a lot of people to be paying attention to something and feeling something. That's why we say it's the quality of its consciousness. And my favorite thing that has been found when you look back through those many events is he rated them. This is again Roger's work for the love and compassion events, high in love and compassion that evoke love and compassion. Global Earth Day, Peace Day, organized meditations. There are a lot of those that go on around the world. Then the next category was events that evoke a lot of emotion, but not high in love and compassion. So Super Bowls, World Cups, big sporting events, things like this, right? A lot of emotionality going on. And then the low category was the evoked response after terrorist attacks, school shootings, things that get a lot of attention, and or big earthquakes, natural disasters, things like this. There was a lot of fear and anxiety and these types of emotions that are evoked. And what he found was that it's a statistically significant, larger effect that I'm going to describe in a second on the network in events high love and compassion. Now, I got my attention because that ties directly into our theoretical models of what we're doing with the Global Coherence Initiative and so on, but which GCP 2.0 is now a part of. So, but now let me explain the real what's really happening. So you've got the physical devices, heads or tails, ones or zeros, spitting them out randomly around the world, all tightly time synchronized back to a central server. What actually happens when we have those significant events or significant effects in that network? It's not that they suddenly are spewing out the higher ratio of ones or zeros, over the given time period. It's even more magical. It's really even cooler what's actually happening, Bob, is that the correlation among the devices is what is significantly impacted. So they're starting to flip ones at the same time.
That is why you get more clarity, because you get more machines flipping ones at the same time.
Or zeros.
Or zeros. Right. Yes.
Yeah, right. And it could be a whole bunch of ones, or it could be repeating patterns. It could be a bunch of ones and a bunch of zeros. But the point is that it's correlated amongst the global network. Right. Okay, that's why we say it's a global effect. And it truly is a global effect. And there's a lot of questions that GCP1 couldn't answer that we are designing GCP2 to be able to answer, like our local effects, local versus non-local, and these types of things.
Yeah, and that was one of those questions that I sort of came to. So did GCP1 not offer the ability to see the RNG data on an individual node basis like you can today? Is that something new?
Oh, no, you could go to the website, and GCP1 was open access. Anybody that was a serious researcher that wanted the data, they could get it for free.
Oh, so you could go in and get the individual data by node.
Yeah, and we're doing the same thing in GCP2. Anybody who's a serious person, it's open access. We share the data. As well, and keep that tradition alive.
So the question then becomes, because on GCP2 you actually have a map, and I'll stick a video here in the podcast for folks of the map that you can bring up of the GCP 2.0 generators. I mean, when I first looked at it, I went to the website, I said, hey, let's see what's going on. I saw there was a deviation going on in the Washington, D.C. area. So, we don't want to make too many assumptions about what the deviations mean, but what are some things that we can say characteristically about the deviations when they happen to a certain RNG?
Well, okay, we really can't, because what I'm talking about, Bob, are global networks at scale effects.
So why would an RNG than a single one show a high deviation? What is it indicating?
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but
on the GCP2 map,
okay. The rotating globe. Okay,
yes, the rotating globe.
All right. Okay, so all right. So as I mentioned, each of our GCP2 devices, like you have on your shelf there, and thank you for being a host, by the way, has 4 RNGs on it. What we're looking is that, so we have device coherence and we have network coherence.
There we go.
Right. So on the map you're talking about, there's another one coming soon. But on it's a really cool map. I'm starting to really like it, the rotating globe. So each of those dots or circles has a different color, is reflecting the coherence, your device level coherence of those devices.
Device level coherence. Very good.
Right. Yeah, and it looks like, so let me go one step further. What we're doing in GCP2 with our 1,000 devices, that is half of the network, 500 of them, is being distributed and organized into what we're calling clusters, cluster cities, cluster areas, mostly large population density cities, some of the larger cities in the world, like Mexico City, Sao Paulo, etc. London. In the US, it's New York and LA are the clusters. So it'll be 20 devices in those geographic tight, in those kind of, it's a large area. New York City.
Yeah. These are very large areas, but yeah.
Yeah, but they're still clustered. That's a lot of devices when you hit figure. There's 4 on each board, so that we can actually look and ask new questions. Then the other half of the 500 is just distributed randomly around the planet, but we're also managing that. So outside in the U.S., for example, outside of New York and L.A., we're pretty much done. Otherwise, if we didn't do that, they'd all end up in the United States and Europe and nothing world, right? So
yeah.
So there's still opportunities for hosts if you live in the U.S. and Alaska needs some. There's not in Alaska yet, but anyway, so questions you could never ask with GCP1. There just wasn't enough density of the devices around.
Right.
What happens if something? There's many examples or many different angles on what I'm going to share with you, Bob. But what happens when let's say the one Mexico City, let's just take it as an example. Something happens in Mexico. Could be an election, that people aren't happy with, or some type of event or an earthquake or whatever that affects people in Mexico, but the rest of the world never hears about. Right. So is that effect stronger locally in those clusters? And then does it roll out globally from there?
Oh, so sort of, can you see a pattern then diffuse across the network? Oh, very interesting.
That's an unknown.
Yeah, well, it is a very interesting concept.
That's why we're designing. See, it's why we spent a year before we launched GCP 2.0 and designing the infrastructure, really thinking through what are the new questions that need to be addressed and how do we go about addressing them.
Right. Well, and the ability to have the 4 on the device to note local coherence, I hadn't even thought of that. And that makes so much sense that when I'm looking at it, then that I'm only really seeing, what's happening here on this device.
So the map that's on the website now is device level coherence.
Yes, device level coherence.
Be another map, a flat map, that's kind of like a heat map, right?
Right.
As we get the network built out, so the infrastructure was designed. It was a lot of work to do this. So that
I'm sure
we're analyzing the whole global network, but we're also at the same time analyzing the clusters,
right,
and showing their data on the map. And that's why I say it'd be like a heat map, so you can actually start to see what's happening globally.
I'm really interested to see, when this. You don't want to ask for large social upheaval to happen, but it would be very interesting to see as events unfold what the GCP tells us about the data of the people around the event.
Yeah, well, even GCP1, when you look at long-term trends, there's some amazing correlations that go on. It correlates with presidential ratings, for example. Stock market trends. One of our team members is a very, very smart economist. That's his job, right? And all these financial models has published several papers on the correlations, not only the correlations to stock market trends, but that you can use GCP data to predict where the market's going. So he looks at it as a measure of global sentiment or global mood. You know, what's the quality of the consciousness, you know, at global scale? That's being reflected.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I have noted. I every once in a while I'll post I'll post the GCP dot, and often when I do, not often, but every once in a while I'll do it in conjunction when the Fed begins to speak. You really see the markets and the GCP will spike at the same time.
Yeah, well, there is long-term correlations.
Yeah.
So the device there on on your shelf, you see, you know, we talked about this earlier. The another thing GCP2 does that wasn't even possible in GCP1 days is the calculations at the network level are being sent back to your device. So when there's a consciousness event happening, we'll just call it, it'll change the pattern of the LEDs on your devices and all the other devices around the world. So you can actually get an indicator right there of what's going on.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. You know, that also brings up a question. So there's a light in the middle, and it says that light in the middle is controlled externally by you folks. What are some scenarios where we might see that middle light come on?
It would be, I don't know yet, but that's more of a more esoteric kind of perspective of mine. And there's a crystal in there as well, a little circular crystal that
very good.
To help connect consciousness with the device itself. So different colors we might experiment with to see if they make a difference, but those would be long-term type.
Yeah. Well, and I would expect there to be multiple experiments, you know, tied into this thing. When I was a kid, I think one of the things that got me so interested in science were the old Radio Shack boxes where you connect things and do your own experiments. And, you know, I saw this and I went, citizen scientist, hey, this looks really fun. You know, so on that note, you know, in terms of things that, you know, I shouldn't do, obviously you shouldn't mess with it. You shouldn't touch it and play around with it. But, you know, as an experiment, should I bring friends over and see if we can get it to light up?
You know what? That's in your, okay. So here, it's a good question. And it also illustrates one of the, I think, really important differences between GCP1 and GCP 2.0. GCP1, in fact, Roger didn't really even want a lot of people to know about it. It's just a passive measuring device,
right?
Kind of globally distributed measuring device that he was asking the question when these events that happen that evoke a lot of people to feel something. Can we measure that as a reflection in the? I'm just going to call it waves in the consciousness field. Like I had a really interesting meeting earlier today, in fact, with another Stanford PhD, a really smart lady. Who's been digging deep into the data, who's actually providing evidence that it actually is a wave-like phenomena, which makes me feel good because that's kind of the metaphor. The metaphors we use to describe what's happening are like rubber ducks floating on the water, right? And they're going up and down at the same time, or they're all choppy seas, or the tides are coming in and out. You can use all these analogies that are wave mechanics. And what we actually saw this morning was evidence that actually is probably what is really happening. That there are these waves in the consciousness field of the planet. That's a little bit off topic of where I was going, but anyway, I was kind of excited about that. I'm sorry, what were we talking about? What was the question you were?
So we were talking about whether I should bring friends over and see if we can use our consciousness to mess with the machine.
Thank you, Bob. Sorry about that for sidetracking myself.
That's good.
We've been having some meetings with different hosts, coordinators in those cluster cities who are getting their friends or families and their networks of people involved to get to 20 devices in the various cities around the world. And most inevitably, these meetings, people saying, "Yeah, I'm gathering some friends around and we're meditating and seeing what happens." That was never our intention, but it's kind of neat that it's self-organizing, and I'm so glad. You know, if I'm honest, I didn't think it through this way in the beginning, but having the 4 RNGs and the device level coherence, you can actually go to the globe and look at your device and see if you're affecting it.
Right. Yeah.
Right. At the local level. It's actually a kind of a cool built-in another aspect of citizen science.
Well, and that was part of my thought. And, I do have a YouTube channel. And so there's also, an opportunity maybe even to look at this from a larger standpoint down the road. I mean, not that who knows, but I looked at it. I went, what are some things that this thing, represents if we're talking about consciousness, and what are some opportunities that brings up? What other types of experiments might you want to share?
Yeah, that's kind of where I sidetracked myself, because of the differences between what GCP 1 and 2 is. In GCP 2, we are bringing in new research questions like intentionality. What happens if we bring a group together, a large group? And this is where you and your listeners, I'd love you to go to the site, sign up. Even if you don't want to be a host of a device, get involved, because we'll be doing a lot of energetic experiments in the future. Like, what happens when we all come together and, let's say, get heart coherent? Yeah, and we have an app that kind of helps measure that, with the intention to, say, raise the vibration in the planetary consciousness field. Right? Can a much smaller number of people have even bigger effects when we're coherent with a shared intention than we saw when large masses of people who are just kind of scattered all over the place feeling stuff? Can we have even larger effects? Some of our early experiments into that, I'll call them muck around experiments because they're not formally predicted and all that yet, say yes, that the quality or the vibration of our consciousness matters. And what we're feeding the field, so to speak, matters in a measurable way. I think the most important thing GCP 1 has told us is that our human consciousness interacts with the physical world in a meaningful way and causes physical changes to occur in the world.
On that note, what do you think is the fundamental underlying consciousness that's interacting there? I mean, how do we classify? It's this, you can't measure it, you can't weigh it, you can't see it, you can't touch it. What is it, and how is it affecting the GCP?
Well, it's a good question. In fact, one of the things I often say about GCP in general, but especially GCP 2, is that one of the goals here is to bring the invisible, make the invisible visible.
Yes.
So that we can start to see and understand how interconnected we really are with each other. And keep in mind that GCP 2 is really one part of a much larger initiative called the Global Coherence Initiative.
And I do want to talk about that, because the magnetometers that you have around the globe, or magnometers, excuse me, were a fascinating addition. As I'd mentioned, I hadn't known that you guys were involved in that. Is this a good time to maybe talk about that part of the project and look bigger?
You can go everywhere you want, but I mean, so that's started so the Global Coherence Initiative is really the umbrella think of it as of our interconnectivity research, really looking how we are truly interconnected, not just with each other, but with nature and the earth itself. So we have and I so wish we didn't have to do this ourselves. But we did, because it just didn't exist. So we have, as far as I know, the only global calibrated global network of magnetometers, some of the most sensitive in the world, and it's really hard to find sites for these things. So you get far enough away from man-made noise and all that.
Oh, sure.
To be constantly measuring around the world the resonant frequencies in the Earth's magnetic fields. So there are a lot of magnetometers out there, right? But there are different types. They're really looking at the ripple on the DC, because they're there to protect power lines, and when we get hit by a solar flare and it causes those kind of disturbances. So our magnetometers are looking at the time varying fields. It's called the resonant frequencies. And we've published quite a lot on that in recent years. We've probably got 15, 20 publications showing a much deeper level of interconnectivity with our bodies and the electric and magnetic fields of the earth than I would have ever thought possible to measure. It's actually kind of blown me away what the data is actually showing. So we have those sites in places like Saudi Arabia, Lithuania, South Africa, New Zealand, Northern Canada, here in California, so a pretty good global network of, again, it's a calibrated system. So that's really looking at the energetic fields we live in.
So we've got the magnetic field that we're studying. We have human consciousness that we're studying with the GCP. There's a third part of this project too, though.
Well, there was a couple more parts. There's we also have a global tree monitoring system. that we initiated a couple of years ago.
Which blew me away.
We're measuring the electrical potentials in trees. The rhythms in trees have surprisingly large voltages. It's in the millivolt range, the same as what we would measure a human heartbeat in.
Oh, wow.
They have circadian rhythms, very dynamic, changing patterns. And the reason we're doing trees is I wanted a living system. Bob, what I'm suggesting under the Global Coherence Initiative is that these energetic or magnetic fields we all live with, you can't escape them. I mean, even the space station's within a lot of the fields of
right.
Not only are we affected by them, clearly, and there's hundreds and hundreds of studies that show that. We don't like disturbed fields.
No, right.
We like coherent fields that we live in. That those fields also interconnect us. That it's a two-way street. That not only are we affected, the information is in those fields that we can detect, especially if we learn how. But we're also coupled to those fields and feeding information into the fields. So it's a bi-directional communication system. And so the fields we live in interconnect all things, all living systems, trees, plants, us, whales,
right.
All animal, the whole nature kingdom is interconnected by magnetic fields. These magnetic fields, and I'm certainly not the first to suggest that. There's some really smart people before me, that quantum physicist types, that have created very detailed mathematical models of how that happens and stuff.
I came across a quote by Itzhak Bentov, the guy who founded Boston Scientific, who said that the Earth's magnetic field, because it is such a long wave field, is the perfect. How did he put this? It is the perfect medium for the psychic phenomenon, for telepathic communication, exactly. If you will.
Well, that would be one aspect, an intuition. Like, how does moms know when the children are doing something they shouldn't be doing or in harm's way, and they're on the other side of the planet.
Right. And there are so many examples of this.
Yeah. And those types of phenomena are disrupted when we have a magnetic field disturbance.
Right.
That's been actually shown in a few studies. So it's actually one of the supporting lines of evidence for what I'm saying, that these fields interconnect, they're information carriers, just like our cell phones. And back in my previous career, I was a communication engineer. I used to work for Motorola.
Oh, sure.
I know a little bit about how we use electromagnetic fields to carry information around.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm saying is we're doing the same thing. I can measure the heartbeat way out here in space with a magnetometer from a person. And we've showed, this is back in the 90s, showed that the fields we're radiating, our cardiac fields, are carrying information certainly about our emotional state.
Right.
I mean, I can tell with 75% accuracy what somebody's feeling just by measuring the field, the information being carried in the field, using almost exactly the same techniques I used to use in Motorola days to demodulate or decode the information being carried by the field. Right. In fact, I've come to the perspective that our technology, is really mirroring nature. And nature invented it way before we came along, and we take credit for it. But
yeah, I think one of the things that folks who follow my channel and follow the Electric Universe like about the Electric Universe is that because of the universe being scalable, you can see such replicable models, at every single level, from the atom all the way up to the galaxy and beyond.
Fractal geometry.
Yeah, it's the fractal geometry of the model.
Right. So anyway, so trees are part of this.
Yep.
Another important part of the Global Coherence Initiative is the Global Coherence app. And that's an free app that allows you to measure your own heart rhythm coherence. But we can also, the real innovation of it is it also allows us to measure collective coherence. So it's a shared kind of community app. In other words, you get your own personal coherence score, but you see what the rest of the community. There's a map that shows you who's there with you now, and
right,
your collective coherence. So we're actually using that in some initial experiments right now. As I mentioned earlier, one of our hypothesis in GCP 2.0 is that it's not necessarily the number of people involved; it's the quality of their coherence.
Of their coherence, sure.
So if we're at a higher vibration, i.e. more coherent, then we can have a larger effect. And if we do that together, there's a nonlinear amplification effect. That's the hypothesis. And we're actually starting to see that with much smaller numbers, a few hundred can have as big effects as thousands that are triggered, or many thousands that are triggered by a media event.
Yeah, years ago I realized, I heard years ago that children who grow up with music are often more intelligent, which, I eventually realized that that's because they learn to coherently get along with the people around them. And, what you're saying is actually not only true, but it's exampled after exampled in the Beatles and in, any rock band you want. Here's four people who took this beautiful sound with a very, the love of music, and they moved millions of people in a coherent way.
And then the last segment, to just give you that, to answer your earlier question, is connection and community. We do a lot to help people connect and, come together to really help pulse the field, if you will, with more love and compassion and kindness, because that's a signal that we collectively, our consciousness puts into the global field that helps uplift all other living systems that are connected, that are within that field.
Now, when you bring all of these together, or parts of these together, are you going to be looking for organizations that are going to have groups of individuals that would, that would be able to come together and perform experiments?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, they're finding me. I can't say that I'm out looking for them. But, one of the questions, and this goes back to GCP1 days, there's and I'm all for it. There are more, I think, organizations and groups now that are sort of waking up and kind of getting what we're talking about here, that the quality of the vibrations we feed into the field, our personal field, and which is coupled to the larger field, if I'm right, matters. And one of the questions that is always asked is, and I think newer people getting into it legally, ask the question, well, I'm going to meditate, or I'm going to start being kinder to people around the day. Does it really matter?
Right. And the answer is yes.
Well,
I'm just remembering people's name.
But this is where I think making the invisible visible is so important, Bob.
Yeah.
And that, like Unify, we work a lot with them, the organized large meditation events and things. That's the thing. We do all this work. Does it matter? Can we measure it?
Right.
Right. And that's what GCP2 allows us to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I got to tell you, I was doing my research on all of the HeartMath Institute programs, these different programs, and I was surprised to see such a broad umbrella of projects under this, and in particular, the tree project was that just really floored me. I don't think people really appreciate how important our environment is to us, and how much, not just what we do to it, right? Not just do we go out and chop it down, but do we care for the forest? Do we care for the streams? And by care, I mean authentically. Do we love the things around us enough not to pollute them? And, when an entire society does that, when they love the space around them, we start to go, hey, this is a little bit of heaven on earth, isn't it? And it is.
A friend of mine was saying, it's really true from my perspective. He said, I really broke out in laughter when he first said it. He said, heaven and hell have the same address.
I like that. I do like that.
Right? I mean,
yeah, it is. Your mind has a lot to do with how you perceive things, has a lot to do with how your attitude is, right? A good attitude, I always try to, we all get down, but, truly, if you bounce back with, we're going to get through this, things are going to be okay, we're going to be great, we can go forward. That just, does so much for people in their life, not, coming to a stop, which is often what happens.
Yeah, which really gets down, I think, to the quality of our subjective experience, which has everything to do with the vibrational state of our consciousness.
Yeah, that's very much so. So I had a couple of questions that I just lined up here. I wanted to talk about, if I can just throw these at you, get your thoughts. So I heard it described that the GCP is a light detector in the quantum field, right? So what kind of light is it detecting? I've wondered, is what the GCP detecting consciousness or consciousness effect on something?
Consciousness effect on something. I mean, even if we, I don't have no idea where that quote came from. That certainly wasn't me, but, even measuring an electric field or a magnetic field, we're measuring the effect of that field on something. We're not measuring the field. We're measuring the effect of that field on whatever the sensor is, a metal plate or a coil of wires, or whatever. A lot of people don't realize that.
Right. Yeah, it's actually picking up the vibration versus.
Well, it's the effect of something acting on it. It's actually not the real field itself. Right. Anyway, reminds me, if I may, just this is another sidetrack here, but the guy that works for me, but the quantum physicist guy that's on our staff now. One of the criticisms that GCP-1, and I'm sure GCP-2 will also draw from the skeptical kind of community is, well, you don't know the mechanism. So I don't believe it because you don't know how it works. And that's true. We don't know the mechanism of how in the heck is it that our emotions and our consciousness is at global scale causing the changes in these devices to be correlated.
Right.
It works 3 trillion to 1 odds against chance, right? I mean,
right. Yeah, we've got the numbers.
We got the numbers. So, but he pointed out to me, he said, my PhD from Stanford was in high temperature superconductivity. It's what I did my dissertation on. I'm a smart guy. And he says, we don't have a clue what the mechanism is. We just know it works.
Right.
And he said it's the hottest. This is just a couple of weeks ago. He was telling me this is the hottest right now, in applied research. This is the hottest thing in quantum physics right now. I mean, I didn't mean to say it that way. High temperature superconductivity, right? Hottest.
Right.
Yeah. It's the most actively being researched, trying to understand the mechanism. But the point he was making is we don't have to know the mechanism to believe or know that something works or not.
Right. Right. It's an indirect way of acknowledging its existence.
Yeah, right. So it's a good point, and there's they still don't know. There's teams all over the world trying to solve that, and there's a lot more money and a lot more funding being thrown at high temperature superconductivity than there is at, consciousness research. How it affects the world, but
right. Can we talk just really quickly about the devices themselves? And when we're looking at the data, what are some of the things that we're looking at? So when we look at the data on the website, are we looking at real time or is this offset data?
It's as close to real time as we can get it.
Right. I mean, the data's got to get to you and correlate.
Yeah. Right. So like on the map you see now, the global map with the device, that's updated every minute. So So it's pretty good. I mean, the time you get in the data, do the math on that many devices around the world and then display it.
Right. Well, it's one of these questions, like I said earlier, not that I'm waiting for the next big event to occur, but when the next event of some sort occurs, one of my things I'll be doing is looking at the GCP 2.0 map to see what sort of changes in, nodal coherence that we have, device coherence is happening.
Yeah. Well, coming soon, though, in fact, there's a whole new website coming soon that's being worked on because the site we have now, it's okay, but it was to be honest, it was a site designed by engineers for engineers to really work out.
It's a lot of information there. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a whole new site that's really more for public consumption coming on its way soon. But one of the things that it isn't on the site yet, but it should be there hopefully within a week from now, is the network level coherence. Because right now it's showing you device, but the real big game is the network level. The kind of like the heat map I was describing. I think
yes,
close. It's coming. And another thing that we've actually created that is really almost ready to be turned on the site now. We call it the virtual RNG. So this is a little. You talked about the dot from GCP-1. The change colors. We want to do something even cooler than the dot for GCP-2. So basically, we're mirroring the device you have on your shelf. That'll go like on the corner. You can actually put it on your website. We're going to make it available to anybody that wants to have the real-time updates.
Oh, very good.
So that virtual RNG mirrors whatever the signal goes out to the device on your bookshelf there. It also goes to the virtual RNG. So it'd be on our website. Anybody that wants to have that on their site to know what the network behavior is, we'll make it available for them.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
So it'll be on the site soon, but
yeah, I find the technology fascinating. From an application standpoint, what are some of the things that we've been able to do with the data in terms of looking back at events? Have we been able to look back at events and say, we had someone who said this happened on X date that we really didn't take into account.
Sure. I mean, that happens all the time in GCP1. I said Roger had the 500 formal events, but there are hundreds of events, that you can't predict. The death of Princess Diana was a big event, on the network. A lot of media, for example. Earthquakes, you can't predict. Well, we can have predictions that during an earthquake, we'll analyze it X, Y, and Z way, but you have to go back and look at the data retrospectively.
It had been noted that earthquakes had caused coherent patterns in the GCP as well. If we talk about these being right, if we talk about the GCP recognizing emotional events, how is it that something that hasn't happened? Is it a future impacting the past, or how does that happen? How does before anybody knows it's going to happen? How does it start changing the GCP?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. But because there's at least two different ways that could happen. And it's also related to a series of experiments we did here in our lab on the electrophysiology of non-local intuition.
Oh.
And what we found, and we spent a few years on this, published a bunch of papers on it, and it's all been replicated by other independent labs now. But long story short, what we found is if you're measuring brain waves and electrocardiogram and skin conductance and these types of things, and I won't go into all the gory details, it's all published. But basically that before an event happened in the future, in this case, it was a photograph, a computer generated an image you would see on the computer. That was either really negative, evoking really negative emotions, or positive emotion, or neutral type pictures. And all the data is collected before the future. Anybody could know what the future picture was going to be. The computer didn't even know. It was randomly selected after the data was collected. And what we found is the heart got the information first, long before the future event, sent a different neural message to the brain. Then you had a brain response, then a body response, all in this what we call pre-stimulus period. So it's the same argument, right? Did we have knowledge of the future, or were we somehow influencing what the picture was going to be?
Chicken and egg question.
Well, yeah, I believe it's intuition. I think we have knowledge future event because of some of the other, I won't go into that now, but so with GCP2, like the 9/11 events, the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Centers, there was a huge, very, very clear, largest effect ever registered on the network, on the GCP1 network, that started about 6 hours before the first attack and persisted for quite a few hours. Now that's also evidence in some larger earthquakes that you also see the signal start before. Now, in the intuition experiments, the reason I mentioned those, we found a highly significant correlation between the magnitude of the pre-stimulus response and the magnitude of the post-stimulus response. In other words, if the photograph really stressed you out and you had a big negative response to it, you had a stronger pre-stimulus response.
Right.
If it was one that, no big deal, then
right,
it was
neutral
response was still there, but it wasn't, it correlated to those. So, in fact, what I'm sorry to be going all over the map with you here, but you're evoking questions and thoughts. One of the things Roger's shown in the GCP1 data is when you take lots of events and you kind of do what's called signal averaging, you kind of look at the response patterns. Look all in the global consciousness data, the global field data, I'll call it. They are almost identical to a brain evoked response.
I did. I put out on my channel. I did a reading of the GCP 2.0 piece that you gave me, and in there I came across that specific section, and it made me stop for a moment and think about what the implications were.
I mean, you can speculate a global brain, maybe, a global consciousness, responding in a similar kind of way.
Right. When I've looked at it and I ask myself the question, how do terrorists wake up at 5 a.m. and begin moving the GCP? It seemed to me that at 5 a.m., just about anything could have happened in the world. The number of total possibilities in the future was the drunkard's walk. But every step they took reduced the number of possible futures. And as the first plane hit the building, everybody's future was changed, of course, as you know.
Yeah, but if we take the intuition data I was explaining, if it's already in the field now, in fact, the researcher this very smart woman from Stanford this morning is making I don't know that I agree with it yet or not, but I don't disagree yet either. I'm neutral. By analyzing some of the GCP1 data, is making a pretty strong case for retrocausality in the data. So that it's actually a possibility, and that in fact, quantum, according to her, and I'm not a quantum physicist, I make no claims to be. She is, and
right.
So is Knockham on my staff. They really are quantum physicists. Said basically what I learned from her this morning was that the retrocausality was really baked into or built into quantum physics.
Yeah, it was one of the things I heard. I heard a quantum physicist say, we sit and we look at our life today with complete belief that we can change the things that are going to happen in front of us, but very few of us believe we can change the things that have already happened to us. And I went, yeah, no, we can change it just by changing how we view what occurred, with more information in a different light. But, can we actually change what happened? Do you think that happens on a regular basis in small and large ways?
I'm not sure you change what happened.
Shape, is that a better word?
I'm sorry?
Is shape a better word?
Well, maybe. Yeah, there's something I need to learn some more about and have some more discussions around this idea of retrocausality. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I guess it means you are actually changing, some of the experiments that have been done, and there are some pretty rigorous experiments that actually do kind of confirm that this retrocausality is a very real thing. That, in fact, I'm not going to say this because it would kind of. Never mind. One of the things we're doing in GCP2 to address that. But if I can't say it publicly or I screw up the experiment. But
yep.
I'm glad I caught myself.
Don't do that. Yes.
Anyway, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No, there are so many facets of what the GCP brings up, and it is one of the primary reasons why I was so excited to have you on as a guest today, is because I don't think enough people understand, one, what the GCP is, two, what the potential outcomes and not only that, but the potential learnings of the experiments. I've often wondered, for example, David Grush stepped up. He's the gentleman who did the congressional testimony on the hidden programs for the UAPs. And he said, I spoke with the Inspector General in July of 2020, and I've been screenshotting anomalous GPC data. And I wonder, because there was one, I believe, on like the 28th of July, is it possible for us to look back and confirm the importance of events like that?
Absolutely. I mean, the data is all there. I mean, we can go back at any time and look to see what happened. I mean, we often do that. Something happened somewhere we never hear of, and
right. And then somebody says, "Hey, what did the GCP do this day?"
Yeah, could you look at so and so? And sometimes, we do. I mean, it doesn't always work. You're not always going to see effects. And another thing, Dean Radin, of course, so you probably know Dean is on our team. Built into it here, and he's published some papers recently, actually, on the GCP1 data, using some pretty advanced, a different type of analysis, multi-scale entropy analysis approaches. And he's making the point that, when you look at the GCP data, or if you think of the consciousness, the global consciousness field in a wave-like nature, it's always moving around. There's always stuff going on. There's groups around right now. There are probably 100 groups somewhere meditating together.
Right.
In India and all over. Lots of people. Or events that are evoking. We just had the large floods in Libya and the big earthquake. A lot of emotion, if you think of all the suffering going on in all those areas, that's all pushing the field around and all feeding information. So that, it's all, and if you look at the data, it's like that. It's like a choppy sea. So when we single in on events, and another thing that Roger is very clear about, and I think I've got pretty clear from him, is that an event of one really doesn't mean anything. You could be lucky. You could be lucky, right? That's why 500 formal predicted events, to build up the statistics. So it's really events like where I'm involved in one right now. We're kind of an initial. It's not a formal test because we didn't pre-register it and all that, but we're doing an experiment with I don't know if you know the One Field movie.
I don't know. I have not. I will look it up.
It's a movie that came out a few years ago. It's had a fair amount of popularity, called The One Field. Very similar concepts to what we're talking about today. And the producer of that film, has an ongoing community around the film. So we've organized a series of 7 meditation events, once a month, over 7 months. Our people are using the Global Coherence app to measure their coherence, so we're getting that measurement. And the guided meditations are being led by a different person each time, but it's always about increasing their coherence first, and then having the intention to raise the vibration in the planetary consciousness field. Right.
Oh,
so
wow.
you do 7 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Now we've got something, right?
Right.
Because now you can look at all 7 events, right, and say, okay, what's the composite of this? Right. That takes out was it just a chance finding?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So that's why we like these kinds of events and to look at.
All right. Very good. Very interesting. Well, Rollin, listen, I very much appreciated your time here today. And do you have any last thoughts or words you'd like to share with folks?
Well, sure. What we've really been talking about is the science of interconnectivity. And what this research really clearly shows, but I don't even think we need the research for halfway kind of awake to know that we're truly interconnected. What this really suggests, and what I would encourage everybody to do, is to pause throughout the day as often as you can remember to, and just simply ask yourself, what am I feeding the field? And understand that it really does matter. It's not only affecting you and your health and well-being, but it's affecting others in measurable ways around you. And if we're right about what we're seeing with GCI and GCP, it's affecting the larger world as well. And if you find yourself maybe feeding the field frustration or anger or anxiety, these types of feelings that a lot of us have these days, shift. Take a few breaths through the center of your chest, through the heart area. And maybe try intentionally activating, some advanced breathing techniques, attitudinal breathing. Breathe in a feeling of peace or kindness or appreciation. That it really does matter what we feed the field. And if you don't buy any of this stuff about the planetary level stuff, do it for yourself.
Amen. Very good. Rollin McCraty, HeartMath Institute. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Peace out.
Take care, everyone.